Forward, march!
Color guard, halt!
If it's convenient for you, would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Color guard, attention! Color guard, dismissed.
This is the opening kickoff event for Darke County's America 250 celebration. Now, remember, 2026 sounds a long time away, but it's not. And we were able, as a chapter, to get the American Revolution Experience traveling exhibit for a month. It already has a huge waiting list of people wanting to have this exhibit come, and most of the time it's for 2 weeks or less. So we're very fortunate. The America 250 Commission in Darke County, President is Darke County Commissioner Matt Altman. Vice President is Greg Billing. Any of the other members of the America 250 Committee here today? Stand up. That's Madam Secretary there, Deb Nice-Sommer. So, again, we were thrilled to get this exhibit, and we're also thrilled that the Richard Montgomery chapter can help participate in this event today. And this is for my own curiosity, is that who Montgomery County is named after?
Yes.
Okay, I've always wondered that, so today was a good day to ask that question. So it is my pleasure to introduce Steve Kaplan. He has many titles and will assume a good more title in the future, so I'll let Steve give you any kind of biographical information he wants to give you. So welcome Steve Kaplan from the Richard Montgomery chapter, Sons of the American Revolution.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the invite to come here and to kick off the celebration of the American Revolution Experience. It's brought to you nationally by the DAR and the American Battlefield Trust, and the local DAR chapter and the Garst Museum work together to bring that here to Greenville. This display has been in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, New Orleans, and now Greenville. So I think those other cities are in good company with Greenville here. So we're very honored to be here, and I'm honored to be asked to lead off the lecture series for this and the opening ceremony here. So the title of this speech is America 250, the Loyalists Become Revolutionists. On the 4th of July, 26, our nation is going to commemorate and celebrate the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The journey towards that historic milestone is an opportunity for all of us to pause and reflect on our country's past, its present, and its future. Now, there are many ways to view the U.S. Revolution. Different perspectives, different points of view, different biases. I, for one, am a proud member of the Sons of the American Revolution, or SAR. My wife, Patty, is in the Daughters of the American Revolution, or the DAR. To join either of those organizations, you have to prove direct family lineage to a soldier or a supporter of the U.S. Revolutionary War. As I researched my family tree, I found my 5th great grandfather William Silverthorne. He was living in the colony of New Jersey at the beginning of the war. It was a divided family. He had 6 sons, 4 of which left home and joined George Washington's Continental Army. 2 of the sons stayed at home and remained loyal to the British Crown. But when those 2 began to suffer for their convictions, they left together on horseback for what they had heard was a British-friendly colony somewhere to the west called Canada. This family story made me wonder how many other families had split loyalties. What made some colonists become rebels and remain British loyalists, and which ones remained British loyalists and which ones became rebels. As I researched further, I realized that it was just until about a year before the Declaration of Independence was signed, there was very little talk of separation from England. The colonies did indeed have their grievances against Parliament and the way that they were being treated, but they worked pretty steadily to try to resolve those issues. Everyone considered themselves to be British citizens, a proud part of the British Empire. There was really no talk of revolution. We are all descendants of British loyalists. In this talk, I hope to show how strong the feelings of British loyalty were within the American colonies. We will examine some of the reasons for this loyalty. We will walk through some of the few of the historical events between 1760 and 1776. We'll see how hard they worked to resolve those conflicts, how hard they tried effort after effort at reconciliation, until really just how resistant they were to any kind of a revolt. That is until, with the help of just one man, very quickly those sentiments changed and they declared their independence. As I said earlier, I'm a very proud member of the SAR. Among other family members, my 4th grade grandfather fought in the Connecticut militia before joining the Colonial Army. My wife Patty, her 3rd great grandfather was a colonel in the regular army, serving under General George Washington. Our ancestors were patriots, those that secured our country's independence and helped establish the freedoms that we enjoy today. The same thing can be said by every member of the SAR and DAR. We are all proud of our patriot ancestors and the role they played in history. And how did they accomplish that historic feat? They did it by starting a civil war. In many important aspects, the U.S. Revolutionary War can be viewed as a civil war. The war was fought between British citizens and British citizens. American patriots, sometimes called separatists on one side, and American loyalists, or Tories, on the other. To the Parliament and the Crown, these patriots were at first protesting, and then rioting, and finally revolting against the legitimate government. In Great Britain, our patriots were all viewed as traitors. One part of the nation wanted to secede from the other part, something that no nation would allow, and something all nations would fight. But yet this war was avoidable. Just think that King George III had granted some minor colonial representation in Parliament, there would probably not be any United States of America today. We would all be part of the great British Empire right now. I personally think that his decision not to offer some type of a compromise was one of the biggest mistakes in world history. For a man that would later be called a tyrant, an abuser, and a despot, at the beginning of his reign over the colonies, the king was very much loved. He was the man. King George III ascended to the throne in 1760 upon the death of his father. He was quite different from his predecessors, namely his father and his grandfather, for he was born, raised, and educated in England, with English as his native tongue. He placed high value on personal and 2 years old, also took a keen interest in literature, history, science, and agriculture. Newspapers here in the colonies portrayed the beginning of his reign like it was the beginning of a new age. They declared the majesty of the empire was to be preserved by the young king's wisdom and valor. In King George III's realm, peace would triumph over war, commerce would foster economic prosperity, science would flourish, and most importantly, religion and the Protestant virtue would illuminate the path forward. That last line of the Protestant virtue was really important to the religious freedom-seeking Americans. You see, George III was assuring the entire empire that despite himself being the supreme leader of the Church of England, he would, and I quote, in no respect interfere with the spiritual concerns of the church. He promised his people the maintenance of the Protestant Reformed religion, end quote. This comment was probably aimed at the colonists, who were often feared that they would lose their Protestant way of life. So as the new king, he was sincerely esteemed by the members of all the colonial society. A year later, the coronation of George III caused much celebration in the colonies. Notwithstanding the fact that it was a distant event, it was an ocean apart, the colonists anticipated and closely followed the event. Some prominent provincial citizens like Benjamin Franklin even journeyed to attend the ceremony. Colonial newspapers gave extensive coverage to the event. The descriptions were made in a tone deeply honoring the king, exalting the glory of his person and the grandeur of the service. Through these stories, even the most distant colonist in rural Massachusetts could feel close to the greatness of the empire and its center, the king. In England, commemorative medals were minted, and various pictures of the new king were engraved. These medals became highly sought-after collectible items on both sides of the ocean. The large size of this market for the royal images is a strong indicator of the colonists' personal attachment to the figure of the king. The fact that colonists willingly purchased and kept such representations of George III, I think, shows a sincere desire for the closeness of their distant monarch and a genuine affection for him. A more material reason for loyalty became a reality 2 years later, and that was peace. The Treaty of 1763 brought an end to the 7 Years' War in Europe and the so-called French and Indian War in America. England had defeated France and its ally Spain. It marked the beginning of an era of British dominance outside of Europe. Great Britain also gained much of France's possessions here in the New World, everything east of the Mississippi. The treaty ensured the maritime supremacy of Britain and actually strengthened the 13 colonies, American colonies here, from their European rivals by removing those rivals to the north and to the south. The downside of it all, though, was that the war resulted in a massive debt for England. Interest payments alone consumed over half of their national budget. In order to pay down this debt, Parliament began passing revenue-raising measures. The first was the Sugar Act in 1764. It was a duty only on foreign goods and really didn't raise much of a concern. But the next year came the Stamp Act. This act required the colonists to pay a tax, represented by a stamp, on various forms of papers, documents, newspapers, almanacs, broadsides, pamphlets, even dice and playing cards. It was a direct tax on items within the colony. It was imposed imposed by the British government without any approval by the colonial legislatures. Prior to this, the colonies themselves, their assemblies, had assumed all the responsibility for internal taxes. So this was something new. In addition, this tax was payable in very hard to obtain British sterling rather than in colonial currency. So certainly this angered the colonists. A loosely organized political group in Massachusetts was founded to advance the rights of the colonists and fight against taxes. They called themselves the Sons of Liberty. At first, they simply promoted that citizens should refuse to pay the tax, and they harassed the tax collectors. A more unified and official response came later that year when delegates from 9 colonies met in New York City in what became known as the Stamp Act Congress. This was really the first united action taken by the colonies. This Congress sought to devise a unified protest against the tax. In the end, a signed petition addressed the Parliament and King George, objecting to the provisions of the act, was sent. The Congress acknowledged that Parliament did have the right to regulate colonial trade, but in their view, Parliament did not have the power to tax the colonies because they were unrepresented in Parliament. So now we jump ahead 5 months, and Parliament actually repealed the Stamp Act. But they didn't do it because of the colonies. They did it because of protests inside England over the same issues. However, Parliament did examine that American petition very closely. On the same day that it repealed the Stamp Act, it passed the Declaratory Act. They were clarifying their position on what they intended to do. This act stated its opinion on that basic constitutional issue raised by the colonists. And in their opinion, Parliament could make laws binding all the American colonies in all cases whatsoever. In Parliament's view, taxation without representation was acceptable, and tax they did. In 1767, Britain passed the Townshend Tax, which included a new revenue tax, a customs tax, an indemnity tax, tighter restrictions and penalties on trade. These Townshend Acts met a lot of resistance in the colonies. People debated them in the streets and in the colonial newspapers. Opponents of the act, especially those hardcore ones like the Sons of Liberty, organized protests that gradually became a bit violent. These protests led up to the Boston Massacre of 1770. But as of yet, there was really no serious talk of separation. Then came the Tea Act of 73. The principal objective of the Tea Act was actually to help the financially struggling British East Indian Company survive. But it was also to convince the colonists to purchase the company's tea on which the Townshend duties were paid. Thus, the colonists would be implicitly agreeing to accept Parliament's right to taxation. Well, the colonists recognized that implication, and a coalition of merchants mobilized opposition to the delivery and the distribution of the tea. The company's authorized consignees were harassed, and in many colonies up and down the coastline, successful efforts were made to prevent the tea from being landed. In Boston, this resistance culminated in the Boston Tea Party on December 16, 1773. Parliament's reaction to the Tea Party included the passage in 1774 of the Coercive Acts, a series of 5 punitive laws designed to punish Massachusetts for its resistance. Here in the colonies, we called them the Intolerable Acts. We weren't going to put up with them. Great Great Britain had hoped that these intolerable acts would isolate the troublemakers in Massachusetts and cause the other colonies to concede the authority of Parliament. It was a calculated risk that backfired greatly. Due to the harshness of those acts, they only served to create sympathy for Massachusetts and encourage the other colonies to organize protests and boycotts. Newspapers all across the colonies condemned the intolerable acts. The harassment of British businesses and troops increased. Individual colonies started to join together to protest. And really, for the first time, there was a few whispers among a few colonists that maybe they would be better off without Great Britain. But the vast majority of colonial leadership still wanted reconciliation with England. A revolution was not seriously considered. This desire, though, for a more unified response to the intolerable acts led to the First Continental Congress in September 1774. Delegates there debated how the colonies should collectively respond to British government's punitive actions. They ended up agreeing on an embargo of British goods. They also drew up a petition to the king, but still desperately trying for reconciliation, the letter began like, quote, "Most gracious sovereign, we, your faithful subjects of the colonies," and so on, end quote. It goes on to plead for some redress of the grievances and a repeal of the intolerable acts. This petition, of course, was unsuccessful. So despite all of these grievances, why were the American colonists really so loyal to Great Britain? Well, for many American colonists, the benefits of being in the British Empire far outweighed any costs. The colonists had access to a large free trading area, naval protection from piracy, which was a big problem in that era. They enjoyed easy credit, cheap manufacturers, and restricted foreign competition. All of these factors contributed to a strong sense of loyalty to Britain and the Crown. Many colonists still had family in Great Britain. This was still fondly considered to be their mother country. Many more had business links with Britain. Being a part of the British Empire was crucial in the terms of commerce and their business operations. Many also felt that the rebellion against the crown, the legitimate government, was morally wrong. They saw themselves as Americans, but loyal to the British Empire, and saw a rebellion against Great Britain as a betrayal of that empire. Others saw the colony's opposition to taxes as a glaring lack of gratitude, because Great Britain amassed that big debt they had while trying to protect the colonists during the French and Indian War. Lots of the debt was spent here in North America protecting the American colonies. This was also a time when Americans paid a lot less in taxes than their British brothers did. Americans paid on an average of 6 pence in direct taxation annually, compared to 25 shillings that Britons paid. That means that Britons paid 15 times the amount the Americans did. And they did so without complaining about their liberties. Some loyalists also saw the argument about taxation without representation as nothing but meaningless and misleading. At this time in England, due to earlier population shifts, large segments of the English population, like urban centers such as Manchester, Birmingham, Sheffield, Bolton, they had no direct representation either. Residents of the fast-growing London suburbs were also underrepresented in Parliament. Some felt alienated when the separatists who rebelled against the crown resorted to violence, such as burning down houses and tar and feathering. People opposed the anarchy that the protests seemed to bring in its early stages. They disapproved of the mob rule embodied by the vandalism and the lawlessness of the Sons of Liberty and some of those Boston radicals. So there were some good reasons for this loyalty, but the situation took a turn for the worse in April of 1775, when British regulars and American militia first fired upon each other. The British were conducting raids to arrest some of the Sons of Liberty and to find some of the Sons of Liberty leaders and to find the supplies, and the colonial militias responded. Later, these two battles at Lexington and Concord would be called, quote, the shot heard around the world, end quote. But at this time, no one thought it was the beginning of a full-fledged war. However, blood was spilled in Massachusetts, and the rest of the colonies took notice. 1 month later, the Second Continental Congress convened to plan their next steps. Most colonists still wanted reconciliation with King George. They ended up creating and sending the so-called Olive Branch Petition to the king. This was a final attempt at reconciliation. In very flowery language, the petition attempted to convey the tender regard that the colonists felt for their kingdom. The petitioners assured the king that they remained faithful subjects of their mother country. The petition implored the king to find a way to resolve the crisis and to avoid any further conflicts. It even offered some possible settlement options for him to consider. The petition, though, is also designed to show the rest of the world that the Americans were doing everything possible to avoid war and that they were not the aggressors. Here again, for the umpteenth time, King George had another chance to stop the protests and unite the kingdom, but he failed to take the opportunity. King George would not even read the Olive Branch Petition. So less than a year later, this same Continental Congress raised an army, appointed a general, wrote the Declaration of Independence. This declaration called the king a tyrant. It listed 27 grievances against him, 6 accusing him personally of abusing power. Now that's quite the flip-flop from what they had been writing before. So what happened at the beginning of 1776? Was there some big last straw? Was there some big evil thing that Great Britain did? Additional taxes? No. As I hinted at earlier, one man seemed to have changed the opinion of many of the Loyalists, and he did it on January 10th, 1776. Thomas Paine published a pamphlet advocating for the independence from Great Britain. He named the pamphlet Common Sense. He was one of the first to propose full-fledged independence. He made public a persuasive and impassioned case for independence, which had really not been given serious consideration before. Writing in plain and direct language to the everyday citizen, not to the educated elite, Paine collected various moral and political arguments to encourage common people in the colonies to fight for a government where all people deserved equal rights and opportunities. Paine understood that philosophical abstractions weren't nearly as powerful as emotion and experience. Instead, Paine urged Americans to embrace their common sense and trust their own feelings about what was right and just how the country should be run, just as they did in all their other everyday decisions. And the public recognized themselves in that argument. The 3 key points in Paine's arguments was 1, the government's purpose was to serve the people, not the other way around. Number 2, hereditary rule, that is, having a king, a royal bloodline, was a terrible idea. And number 3, America had the rare opportunity to create a new nation based on self-rule, America could be the home of the free. Common Sense, the pamphlet, became an immediate sensation. In proportion to the population of the colonies at that time, 2.5 million, it has the largest sale and circulation of any book ever published in American history. Estimates are that in 1776 alone, 500,000 copies were sold. The public became energized. The pamphlet served as a rallying cry. The popularity of Common Sense made it tough for colonial leaders to continue taking their halfway stance against Britain. As John Adams wrote to his wife in April of '76, quote, "Common sense, like a ray of revelation, has come in seasonably to clear our doubts and to fix our choices." The public and the leaders were now inspired to take that tough road. So the Declaration of Independence was written and published, war was declared, and the fight for independence officially began. Now, not of course all colonists agreed with that decision. Many loyalists took up arms and fought for Britain. Some, like my Silverthorne family, fled patriot-sympathetic areas. I have heard estimates that during the war, perhaps a third of the colonists supported each side, with the remaining third just wanting to be left alone. Once the war was declared, the separatists were the ultimate underdogs. They were outmanned and outgunned. All was almost lost in the opening battles. They suffered greatly from a lack of supplies, shelter, clothing, and food. But these patriots believed in their cause. They played for the long game. With a surprise attack on Christmas Day, some smart strategy, and a little help from the French, they turned the world upside down. The underdogs prevailed, and the result was a nation of free people, a republic that would grow to be a world power and a beacon of freedom and righteousness for people all over the globe. In closing, I said earlier that we are all descendants of British loyalists, but perhaps the more important fact is that these same loyalists became revolutionists. They were inspired to stand up for their rights, to fight for their rights. The Revolutionary War can indeed be seen as a civil war. It can also be seen as a great British mistake that changed world history. But it can be viewed as a battle won for the freedom and the rights of all people. It was the start of the greatest nation on earth. I began this talk by saying that I was proud of my ancestors' role in founding of our country. We can all be proud and thankful for the patriots that got this country started. We can all be proud and thankful for the veterans and the military that have kept it going. As we approach the 250th anniversary of the beginning, let us continue to learn about the sacrifices made in the past so that we can live in the freedoms we enjoy